We will begin the press conference by Prime Minister Kishida. We will have opening remarks from the Prime Minister. Today, we have approved the new national security strategy, national defense strategy, as well as the defense build-up program at the cabinet. I've been saying that the world is at a historic crossroad. Over the past 30 years, the world has globalized. The world has been integrated and then started to connect. However, in recent years, in the international community, power balance has changed, and countries are in conflict. There's confrontation between countries, and the direct competition of national interest is becoming more obvious. And then there's a global divide. The international community is in an era with complexity, with cooperation and confrontation, with cooperation and division. And this division is most understanding in terms of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, this atrocity. And unfortunately, in the vicinity of Japan and those countries and the regions, there are activities such as the enhancement of nuclear missile capability and rapid military buildup and unilateral attempt to change the status quo by force. These are also becoming more outstanding. As we look back the past 1 year, for the first time in 5 years, a ballistic missile flew over the airspace of Japan. And there is also a ballistic missile landed in Japan's EEZ. We also saw signs of preparation towards nuclear testing. And the boundaries between contingency and peacetime, military and non-military, are no longer clear-cut. The scope of national security is not only limited to conventional diplomacy and the defense, it's expanding to economy and technologies. While we are facing this turning point of history, I need to thoroughly protect our country and our people. As the Prime Minister, that's my mission. With that steadfast resolve, from the end of last year, I've had 18 NSC foreign ministerial meetings for discussions, and I came up with the answers for the formulation of the new NSS and also various challenges in the national security arena, including the fundamental and reinforcement of defense capabilities. In the next 5 years, in order to fundamentally reinforce our defense capabilities, we will implement a defense build-up program worth of 43 trillion yen in 2027 with the reinforced defense capability and the complementary initiatives. We will secure the budget of defense to 2% of GDP, and we need to secure stable funding for that. In the process, to reach this conclusion, we conducted hearings at the National Security Secretariat, as well as expert panels. I've received various opinions. We also had the ruling party's working team with LDP and the Komeito Party. We had frank and energetic discussions. And we also got proposals from Japan Innovation Party and DPFP. I'd like to extend my gratitude for the efforts and cooperations from all the stakeholders who hope for the peace and the security of Japan and the international community. Of course, in order to protect the people's livelihood and the lives and the business activities, what comes first is the diplomatic efforts to create a national security environment and the international environment that are in favor of our country. We will continue to put our focus on freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law and other those universal values. And Japan-U.S. alliance will continue to be our linchpin. We will push forward multilateralism, and proactive diplomacy will also be strengthened. And of course, for diplomacy, that is supported by defense capability. And the reinforcement of defense capability will also make our diplomacy more convincing. And as we study the possibility to reinforce defense capability, we assume the various situations and also the abilities of our counterparts and the new ways of fighting. We look at the capability of the current our SDF, and to see if we can deter the threat. And when those threats materialize, can we thoroughly protect this country? We did a very realistic simulations. And to be very frank with you, the current situation, it's not sufficient. What kind of new capabilities do we need? Let me give you 3 examples. The first ability is to have counter-strike capabilities. We have built a missile defense structure. The importance remains the same. However, hypersonic gliding weapons and the missiles fly in irregular trajectories, etc. The missile technologies are advancing rapidly, and saturation attacks, such as launching a large amount of missiles, is also possible. So under this tough environment, the counter-strike capabilities are deterrents to stop the attack. That's going to be an indispensable capability. The second example is respond to new areas, including space, cyber, and electromagnetic waves. The boundaries between military and non-military, peacetime and emergencies are no longer clear-cut. There will be hybrid war fights, and gray zone status may become permanent under such tough national security environment. In those new areas, including space, cyber, electromagnetic waves, we need to strengthen our capability in terms of both quantity and quality. The third example is to strengthen the defense structure in Nansei region. We need to adapt to the change in the national security environment, and the core force for the GSDF in Nansei region will be increased by 2-fold, and we will also strengthen transport, aircraft, and vessels in order to have swift actions to deploy forces from across the nation. This is also important from the perspective to protect the people at times of a contingency. And the capability enhancement for Japan Coast Guard to protect Senkaku Islands, and we also need to work on initiatives to enhance the collaboration with SDF, including the control procedures of the maritime by defense minister, and also including more ammunitions and secure enough defense buildup cost, and then also improving the welfare for our SDF staff. In the next 5 years, we will execute defense buildup program worth of 43 trillion yen in a steady manner, and by improving the deterrence and responsiveness of the SDF, we can lower the possibility of military attack. And not only defense capability, we will utilize the comprehensive national strength to protect our country seamlessly from in all aspects. We will strengthen the capability of JCG and also promote economic security policy. These will work. We will work on those swiftly across the government. And based on those initiatives, and also to supplement the fundamental reinforcement of defense capability, we will also work on R&D and the public infrastructure development to strengthen a comprehensive defense structure. And in 2027, Japan will take necessary measures for the budget of defense for the fundamental reinforcement of defense capabilities and the complementary initiatives to make the defense budget to reach 2% of the current GDP, including NATO and other countries, including in order to maintain national security environment. They are supporting increasing defense capability in accordance with each economic capability, and we will work with our allies and like-minded countries and accelerate our initiatives toward 2027.
We will enhance our defense capabilities over the next 5 or over 5 years. However, from 2027 and onward, we have to keep them and enhance them for the future. In order to make it happen, supporting financial sources, every year 4 trillion yen stable resources will be essential. So therefore, what I have been consistently talking about in ordinary sessions are we will decide the contents of defense capabilities enhancement, budget, and funding sources by the end of the year and present them in a clear-cut manner to the people of Japan. As stable financial sources, what I instructed to Finance Ministry, first of all, we need to review and make all the efforts around the utilization of expenditure reduction, surplus, and non-tax income. And as a result, the necessary funding, about three quarters, will be covered by expenditure reduction and other efforts. So we have a pass. And remaining 1 quarters, which is around 1 trillion yen or a little extra, we had various discussions in this regard. And what I thought as a Prime Minister of Japan is, first of all, we need to fundamentally reinforce our defense capabilities to protect people's lives, livelihoods, and businesses. And stable financial resources to make it happen shouldn't be passed on to the future generation. However, it has to be handled as the responsibility for the future generation as the current generation. And fundamental reinforcement of defense capabilities means, simply put, buying jet fighters or missiles. Whether or not we should really cover such funds by borrowings, is it really right? So I asked I asked myself this question again and again, and I thought that it has to be covered by stable financial sources. So this time, the policy is to make a decision in an integrated manner. Within the ruling coalition, we had a heated discussion, and today we were able to work out the tax reform outline. And on corporate tax, against the corporate tax amount or value, new or additional tax equivalent to 4 to 4.5% rate will be asked, and translated in the corporate tax rate is going to be around 1%. And we will drastically ramp up our care for SMEs, and in terms of income, around a 24 million yen deduction was set up. And as a result, we will be able to cover around 6% or less of all the corporations this time. And regarding income tax, now the wage hike is not catching up with inflation. So given the current economy of each household, we should avoid income tax burden or increase. First of all, against the income tax value, 2.1% is covered or is given for the reconstruction tax, and it's going to be lowered to 1%. However, taxation period will be extended to secure the enough fundings for reconstruction, including decommission activities and the Fukushima Institute for Research, Education, Innovation. Such long-standing efforts will be supported on a continuous basis in a responsible manner. And the reduction amount or the equivalent to that, the new tax of 1% will be asked for, and regarding the tax for tobaccos, per cigarette, 3 yen hike is going to be done in a phased manner. Traditionally, what I have been talking about is this measure will not be carried out from next year and onward. Regarding the implementation period, given the current economies in mind, or with that in mind, towards 2027, over a few years, multiple years, they will be carried out in a phased manner. And regarding the start timing, we will continue to have a discussion in the ruling coalition, and the decision will be decided or made next year. So people might say we don't have to necessarily make such a decision by the end of this year. However, it is already clear that we have to ask the people to bear the cost in the future. If we don't present such an idea with that in mind, we cannot hold ourselves accountable. So we have to be candid, and we would like to be cordial and sincere. So therefore, I made such a decision, and on a continuous basis regarding this measure's purpose and contents, we'd like to deliver a cordial explanation to the people of Japan. And the current peace and rich lives have to be protected, and the future generations and the future Japan responsibilities have to be protected or realized. And for that purpose, I'd like to ask for your cooperation. There is a passage of peace and security legislation under the Abe administration. Whatever the situation is, seamless response, such a system has been already established from a legal and theoretical standpoint. However, this time we will be compiling new 3 documents, and by doing so from a practical perspective, we'd like to solidify, or we will solidify, security structure. And the 3 documents and the security policy will be a big change in terms of, or from the post-war security policies. Of course, it will be covered within the framework of the Japan Constitution, international law, and the domestic laws. So 3 non-nuclear principles and exclusive defense and peace-loving nation, such Japanese past will not be changed. And for that perspective, with transparency, we will explain ourselves to the people of Japan, not only that, to relevant countries. We will try to explain it thoroughly for understanding. So that was my explanation about how we will be enhancing our defense capabilities to protect Japan. And such enhancement of defense capabilities cannot be done without the cooperation and understanding of people of Japan. So each one of us has to be aware of the importance of protecting the nation in a proactive manner, and it is well exemplified by the tendency of Ukraine. And we are facing a big turning point in security policies for this country. In order to fulfill our responsibilities for the future generation, I'd like to once again ask your cooperation. Thank you very much.
Now we'd like to take questions. When you're named, please go to the standing mic and state your affiliation and name. Before you ask your question, please ask 1 question per person. Let us take questions from the coordinators first. Nihon TV, please. This is Hiramoto for Nihon TV. Could you please talk about the process that led to the decision of the tax hike? So there are some opinions say that this is too rush, and there are some issues in the process. And from last week, you said that the discussion has started in the diet session, and then your policy has been consistent. But your policy and the ideas of the ruling parties or the public, there might be a gap. So do you think there was any problem in the decision-making process? On the process, I don't believe there was any issue. The 3 documents and the fundamental reinforcement of defense capability. From the end of last year, we already started discussions, not just an ordinary diet session. So from the end of last year, for 18 times, we had NSC foreign ministerial meetings to have discussions. And also, we conducted hearings at the National Security Secretariat, as well as expert panels to hear various opinions. And based on that, as I stated before, and I have been holding a policy to decide the content of defense capability reinforcement, the budget, and the source of funding. The three elements will be decided in an integrated manner by the end of the year and show a clear picture for the people. And that's what I have been saying consistently since spring in the ordinary diet session. Those three documents and the reinforcement of defense capabilities are based on the discussions within the government and the expert opinions. We have put together the government's ideas, and we have shown it to the ruling parties. And then there were frank and energetic discussions at the ruling party's working team with the LDP and the Komeito Party. And for the source of funding, the ruling party's Tax Research Commission also had a discussion. The scale of the budget was discussed by the government, and we also sorted out the ideas, and then we proposed our ideas to the ruling coalition. And then on the source of funding, we also showed our ideas, and then at the ruling party's Tax Research Commission, we asked them to have discussions. Of course, there were big discussions, and through the discussions, as the ruling party's Tax Research Commission, they put together the outline and made a decision on that outline. And based on that, based on such ruling party process, the government made a cabinet approval on this matter. So again, those three documents and the fundamental reinforcement of defense capabilities, we have been engaged in a very careful process over 1 year, or more than 1 year. I don't think there were any issues, but if there are opinions from the people, we need to take those voices seriously. We will continue to explain carefully for the people. That will be what we keep in mind. We would like to continue to explain. That's what I think.
Next, we'd like to move on to Nakagawa-san of Yomiuri newspaper, please. Yomiuri newspaper, my name is Nakagawa. This time, because of the three security papers, so you'd like to fundamentally reinforce your defense capabilities, and this is a big change for defense policy. And from next year, over 5 years, the total amount is 43 trillion yen, which is 1.6 times from the current 27 trillion yen. Counter-strike capability is also part of that. So it's a fundamental change and a fundamental enhancement. What is the reason and background once again? And as part of the new NSS regarding the China's military movements, this is the biggest strategic challenge, you said. So what is the reason for such a positioning? Yes. Number one, regarding the defense policies and the background or reason behind this. Like I have said in the beginning, around Japan, security environment is becoming rapidly more imminent and more severe. And in the vicinity of our country, nuclear missile capabilities are being enhanced, and the rapid military buildup is being observed, and unilateral attempt to change the status quo by force, such movements are becoming even more stark. Like I have said before, over the last course of 1 year, for the first time in 5 years, ballistic missiles flew over Japan soil, and within our EEZ, there was a landing of a ballistic missile as well. And hypersonic missiles and irregular trajectory missiles, and over such missiles, technologies are becoming also rapidly advanced as well. Even so, people's lives and livelihoods have to be protected. This is the most important great responsibility for politicians, whether or not we can really fulfill such responsibilities. Once again, we have to seriously think about this. This is quite an important challenge. Once again, like I have said before, because of peace and security legislation, legally and theoretically speaking, we will be able to respond to the situation. We have such a structure in place. However, underpinning defense structure was not sufficient, or whether or not it's really sufficient in terms of quality or quantity in order to protect people of Japan. This is what we have to really think about from a political perspective. So that was a background for the past 1 year's discussion. So we have the international affairs, and based on such a thinking regarding the enhancement of defense capabilities, I have been thinking about it. So we have our threats for Japan, whether or not we are really deterring that, and when it is materialized, can we really protect through people's lives? So we have done some practical simulation. So I talked about the 3 examples, but apart from that, so-called ability to continue to fight on this front, so far, as part of the build-up program, for the new aircrafts and vessels, we have done some intensive investment. However, without sufficient ammunitions and others, we will not be able to cover all the gaps. And for this part, how much and what we should own, we have done some simulation to come up with necessary equipment and volume. So that's what we have accumulated over the last 1 year's discussion. And there are also a number of transportation or transport aircrafts and fighter jets which have a shortage of parts, and we have to maintain them by earmarking adequate maintenance costs. That's what we have been discussing too. And the future game changer, so-called unmanned asset defense capability, on this front, we haven't done enough investment so far. And including this field as well, the contents of the defense build-up program and what we have to urgently establish in order to protect this country. With that in mind, we have compiled the papers. So under severe environment of security, with excluding all available options, we have had a review from a practical perspective. And about China, the external posture and military movements around this country, in terms of peace and the safety of Japan, we have to also assure peace and stability of the international society, and we consider that it is a challenge for the international order. And this is a strategic challenge. This is because this is not only about the securing peace and security or stability of Japan and international society. However, the challenge is really wide-ranging in terms of protecting and enhancing the international order. So that was the backbone. And as part of NSS, Japan and China, both nations have grave responsibilities together for peace and prosperity of the international society, including this region. And constructive and stable relations have to be established. And this is the essential component of peace and stability of the international society, including the Indo-Pacific region. On top in terms of economic and human exchanges, we need to benefit the interests of most nations on this front. We will be able to cooperate. So that's a clear statement of the national security strategy as well. So with China, relations with China and the statement about China. So that was the idea.
だからご質問をお受けします。
Now we will take questions from other media outlets. Please raise your hand if you want to ask a question. I will call your name and please come to the microphone. Tamura-san from Sankei newspaper, please. So in the three documents, it also include the reviewing of the operational guideline for the three principles on the transfer of defense equipment. Japan has extended defense equipment for Ukraine, and it is important to maintain Japan's defense industry. The review is very important. So how do you see the necessity and what would be the timeline to proceed with the review? And also, the counter-strike capability, the capability to attack the enemy base. 2 years ago, this was proposed by Prime Minister Abe. And then last spring, before you assume the position of Prime Minister, you also tweeted about it. And as you reviewed the three documents this time, what is your frank opinion? Thank you for your question. So, first of all, on the transfer of the defense equipment, that was your question. And the peace and the security of the Indo-Pacific region, that needs to be secured. And in order to create a national security environment favorable for Japan, and also to support countries who are suffering from aggression, violating international law, like Ukraine. These principles are important policy tools. On top of that, it is also effective in terms of maintaining and strengthening the foundation of Japan's defense industry, that is, a defense capability itself. And you asked about the schedule. The three principles on the transfer of defense equipment and the operational guideline. The review of the systems we will work together with the ruling parties by carefully making coordinations. And I will, of course, point out the importance of the review, but for the details, we would like to continue to work with the ruling parties. And for counter-strike capability, as you pointed out, if I may, I've been stating my idea on the counter-strike capability already, including that. The government this time has put together the new three defense documents in order to protect the lives and the livelihood of the public. We need to have discussions with all the options on the table, and that was the stance that we took in discussions, including the discussions for counter-strike capabilities. And the current defense structure is important. We need to maintain and further reinforce that. But counter-strike capability is also something we need to think about. So in the documents, we incorporated the idea. And how do we materialize such an idea? We need to continue to ask that question. And we sorted those ideas as we compiled the three documents, and we would like to think about specifically what do we need to do in order to protect people's lives and livelihood.
の鈴木さん。
Next, 共同通信鈴木さん。共同通信 My name is Suzuki. About Japan-US relations and on Okinawa, I have a question. So these three documents talked about the SDF and the U.S. forces deterrence enforcement. Are you going to revise the U.S.-Japan or Japan-U.S. guideline? Are you going to revise it? And regarding the enhancement of ground self-defense forces in Okinawa, Mr. Tamaki, the governor, is talking about the reduction of the U.S. forces and the burden in Okinawa. So how are you going to ask people's understanding about Nansei area regarding the Japan-U.S. guideline? Nothing has been decided at this juncture. First of all, based on these three documents, at all available levels between both nations, Japan and the United States, we'd like to talk closely. At any rate, as part of the national security strategy, Japan-U.S. alliance is a linchpin of the national security policies. As it is said, on a continuous basis, on various fields, we'd like to further promote the Japan-U.S. defense cooperation to further enhance our deterrence and response of the alliance in question, and with Okinawa and with other areas in terms of our explanation to local people. Like I have said before, the national security environment is becoming even more imminent, and by enforcing our SDA troops or forces, we need to enhance our defense structure in Nansei Island or Nansei area, and such idea has been part of this document. If we have contingencies happening from the perspective of people's protection, we have to consider this as an important part. And in terms of national security, Okinawa is positioned has an important position. So the U.S. forces deployment is an important element for response and adherence of the Japan-U.S. alliance, and under the current environment of security, its importance is becoming even more imminent. So therefore, we have to, of course, lessen the burden of Okinawans as the responsibility, starting with the Futenma Station return and the return of the land south to Kadena, and the transfer of the U.S. Marine Corps to Guam. So as soon as possible, we'd like to realize such initiatives. And we are surrounded once again by the tough national security environment, and we have to consider the strategic significance of Okinawa regarding these pieces. And about the idea of the three documents, we'd like to clearly express our ideas to the people on the ground and in each local area, and it has to be done on a continuous basis.
それではその次にじゃあ
Next, Takahara-san from Japan Times. In the three defense documents, it states the counter-strike capability is to be held, and then there are concerns expressed that this might be the change in Japan's exclusive defense policy. There are such concerns at home and abroad. What's your idea on this? From the end of last year, we have been studying and asking questions if we have enough preparedness to protect the lives and the livelihood of the people, including counter-strike capability. We have studied realistically without excluding any options. And this study is within the framework of the Constitution and international law, and also Japan's domestic laws, and also to maintain the roles and the responsibilities of Japan and the U.S. And there's no doubt in that. And as a result, we decided to hold the counter-strike capabilities, the definitions, and then the occasions to execute the capabilities. The details are stipulated in the national security strategy. And having said so, the exclusive defense policy means to execute the defense capability when we receive military attack, and then the capability needs to be kept at the minimum for self-defense, and the capability of defense to be held also needs to be minimum that's necessary for self-defense. So based on the spirit, the philosophy of a constitution, the stance of the passive defense strategy remains the same. And the counter-strike capability is also based on such a basic policy, and we will continue to stick to exclusive defense policy. And for those concerns that you mentioned, we will continue to explain our ideas carefully.
NHK Shimizu-san. Thank you. Like you have mentioned in the beginning, you yourself have given an instruction about the GDP 2% such budget measure. And what does it mean inside and outside of Japan? And you wanted to avoid individual or people's burden. However, if not now, however, over a long time, because of reconstruction tax measures, there might be some burden. So how do you see this? And how are you going to ask people's understanding? First of all, regarding the first part of your question, 2%, there was such a mention. However, we haven't really talked about this number with too much focus on the number itself. So what we have done first, we tried to work out the specifics of how to enhance our defense capabilities and then we worked out the size of the defense build-up program, which has to be established for 5 years, and then we also came up with the size of defense budget for the 5 years and 2027. And the supplementary structure for such enhancement, for example, JCG's abilities and PKO expenses, R&D and public infrastructure establishment, and such expenses for comprehensive defense structure enhancement was accumulated. So this is a big premise. On the other hand, with NATO and with other countries, in order to maintain the national security environment on par with the economic power, equivalent defense budget has been earmarked and spent. Such is a posture. So therefore, as for Japanese government or for Japan, as part of the international, always in the international society, we will try to enhance our national and defense capabilities. And so that has been a focus of the 3 national documents or defense documents or security documents. So the understanding or the framework of international society is quite important. So therefore, GDP is one of a significant most significant criteria for us. So therefore, for fiscal 2027, we'd like to consider the enforcement of defense capabilities and the supplementary components. And so therefore, we came up with the measure which is equivalent to 2% of GDP. And regarding the burden of the income tax, like I have said before, first, regarding a reconstruction special income tax, on this front, we will ensure the total amount of the tax or fund without failure, and 1% and or reduction proportion 1% for this amount is going to be added as additional tax, and whether or not people have to bear more with the taxation period in mind, there was such a question. Like I have said in the previous press conference, and this time, like I have said before, under the current severe economic situation, income tax burden increase should be avoided. That's what I talked about. And this time, through this measure for the time being, 15 years later, up until 2037, we will not have the increase of the burden of income tax. However, by having an extension of the taxation period from 2038 and onward, additional tax will be continuing, and so that way there might be some burden to be incurred. There has been such a discussion. However, economic growth and the wage hikes and such virtuous cycle needs to be maintained up until 15 years later. And by assuring, or we have to really assure sustainable growth. So as part of such an economic cycle, the burden has to be eliminated or reduced as part of our efforts of the Japanese government, and by doing so, we'd like to ask for people's understanding.
それでは、ロイターの杉山さん。
Sugiyama-san from Reuters, please. My question is about national security and economic growth. So in the national security strategy, in order to support national security, it is important to strengthen the economic foundation. And yesterday, you met with the CEO of Apple, Tim Cook, and exchanged opinions on employment and then investment. And the government is going to push forward initiatives to expand the domestic investment and to have manufacturers return to Japan and attracting foreign investment. How are you going to communicate Japan's attractiveness? In the past, many Japanese companies have transferred its manufacturing base to overseas due to strong yen, but recently yen has been depreciating. The situation is changing. And we also recognize the economic security's importance and then the stability of supply chain as having a big impact on investment decision. So I think Japan is getting more attractive as a destination for a stable investment. By utilizing such investment environment, and in order to, as a stimulation to attract investment, we have established a supplementary budget with 7 trillion yen and a multi-year strategic investment support is included in the budget. Semiconductors, storage, batteries, vaccines, and food, and other strategic goods we would like to lead to the development of manufacturing base in Japan. And also, in order to proactively attract investment from overseas and also to promote direct investment in Japan, we are going to put together a new action plan in spring. And also in the public and a private forum to expand the domestic investment that was held the other day from Mr. Tokura, the chairman of Japan Business Federation. He says that in 5 years, the investment will be 100 trillion yen per year, which is the highest level equivalent to the economic bubble era. There's a sign for changes in Japanese economy. So there are movement of Japanese companies returning to Japan for manufacturing. We should catch this opportunity to expand the base of Japanese companies in Japan, to have them return to Japan, and also to expand the investment from foreign companies.
TV Tokyo, Shinohara-san, please. This week, Prime Minister, you made some comments in your executive meeting of the party, and regarding the tax increase, the LDP said as people's responsibility, such burden has to be handled. So there was such a mention from the party and from people of Japan. So people criticized on this remark. However, there was a correction about the statement. Prime Minister's intention was we, as a party executives, we have to consider this in a responsible manner. What was your real intent of your state? And there seems to be subtle difference in between. However, how are you going to respond to the people's criticism? And regarding the process for creating such gaps of understanding, what was it? Like I have said before, what I said is, in the LDP or executive meeting of the LDP, in order to protect people's lives and peace of Japan, and we have to also protect the future generation, or we have to be responsibly act for the future generation as a current generation. So that was the intent. However, so as part of the communication flow to the press, so that was somehow the wording was converted into the one which drew criticism. And regarding the gaps of this, how the wording was communicated, I think the mistake is attributable to administrative procedure, but we'd like to avoid such a mistake in the future. And the real remarks, so please thoroughly. Of course, we'd like to talk about what was actually said, and the intent of that actually was as part of the document. So therefore, the current generation has to responsibly act for the future generation. So I'd like people to understand my intent and give us our support.
新報の吉江さん。
Next, Yoshie-san from Kahoku Shinpo. The ruling parties are going to use the special income tax for reconstruction as the financial resources for defense budget increase, and there might be this may affect the reconstruction of Fukushima. And why you decided to utilize the special income tax for reconstruction? You didn't have any other options? So on the financial resources for reconstruction, first of all, against the income tax amount, currently 2.1% is the rate for the special tax for construction, and it will be decreased to 1%, and we will prolong the taxation period so that we can secure the necessary total amount for reconstruction and decommissioning, and also the establishment of FRA in Fukushima and then in the region affected by the disaster. We need to have long-term initiatives, and those long-term initiatives will be supported. In order to do so, I will continue to fulfill my responsibility. And that's why we thought about, we considered the extension of the taxation period. And on top of that, the reduced part, 1% tax rate, we are going to ask people for additional tax of 1%, and the total amount is going to remain the same for reconstruction. And we also need to support long-term initiatives, and we also have to show such stance by the government. And again, our ideas need to be explained continuously towards the residents in the region affected by the disaster.
秋山さん。
Nikkei Akiyama-san, please. Nikkei newspaper, my name is Akiyama. About the financial sources for ramped up defense budget, I have a question. This time, corporate tax will be also covered as a measure, as a value-added one, or as a measure, and 6% of the corporations will be covered by this tax. However, large corporations will be subject, so therefore it might hamper wage hike and capex. So how are you going to respond to such voices? Once again, like I have said before, again, repeatedly, regarding our ideas for economic measures and defense capabilities enforcement, we have to really consider them in a well-established manner and thinking. So, of course, the economy has to be a big driver for finance. That's what I have been telling you consistently. So that's why a large amount of JGBs, national bonds, were issued to cover economic package of 39 trillion yen for the weaker yen and the structural wage hikes and support and semicon and 7 trillion yen investment, including inflation measures. And the budget cooperation, and as part of next year's tax reform, green transformation, advanced investment, and wage hike support, NISA's enhancement will be proceeded. So therefore, for wage hikes and the capex, these are the most important items on our agenda as the administration for our economic policies. So that has to be maintained. On the other hand, what we have been talking about now is how to protect people's lives, livelihoods, and businesses. We need to fundamentally enhance our defense capabilities of the nation. And for this part, we have to consider responsible financial sources, and stable sources shouldn't be passed on to the future generation, and it has to be handled and covered by the current generation. About 6% of the corporations will be in scope. We are not really underestimating the impact was a number. And in terms of enhancement of the defense capabilities, seeding, securing assurance and supply chain maintenance and the deterrence, and we have to also reduce the risks for the market turbulence. And in this regard, they will contribute directly to the smooth carrying out of economic operations and activities. So therefore, with that in mind, people who can afford it, we'd like to ask their cooperation as much as possible, and we'd like to further explain ourselves, and that's what we are going to do as well.
朝日新聞の石松さん。
石松さん from Asahi Newspaper. So let me ask you about the counter-strike capabilities. So in the three defense documents about the counter-strike capability, when there is a missile attack from the enemy, and prevent the attack from missiles, and to further deter further military action, it is the ability that we can use to counter. And then based on the previous government's definition or thinking, even before the military attack, it is still possible to counter strike. And this time, when there is a missile attack, so that's the definition for the counter-strike capability. So I want to ask if this ability is only to be used when a missile is launched. So this is pertinent to how do we construct Japan's defense structure. And therefore, I need to refrain from answering to your question. And as I was a foreign minister, I had a lot of discussions about the international law, especially the legislation for peace and security. I was a minister in charge, so I was engaged in the discussions. And then based on international law, the first strike capability is against international law. So we need to make an accurate decision on how to execute strike capability, and there are various opinions on that. And it's a very difficult issue in terms of preemptive attack. And Japan, as Japan, we make sure to create a system within the framework of international law and other pertinent laws. And I cannot disclose further because that is pertinent to the confidentiality or delicate issues of national security.
それでは
Because of time constraints, two more questions, Okawa-san. A freelancer, my name is Okawa. Thank you very much for your duties. And I'd like to ask about the defense of Japan. At the time of the World Depression, Mr. Takahashi Korekiyo, so the JGBs have to be issued, and so actually issued for rescue of the farmlands and others. And by doing so, heavy industry was made prosperous. And through this national defense in Ukraine strategy, we are looking at the encryption fighting, and with regards to quantum computing, I think that has been also observed. So therefore, national defense or enhancement and advancement of science are becoming a sort of borderless. So how do you see such fusion? Like I have said before, military, non-military, such borders are becoming more ambiguous. That has been the reality of the international society. So amid such circumstances, each nation, in a comprehensive manner, they have to cover defense capabilities, traditional security, and defense or diplomacy will not cover all the gaps, and the technology and the economy have to be also taken into account for comprehensive security policies. At any rate, like I have said before, within a constitution, domestic law, international law, and exclusive defense, and starting with that, we have basic postures which will be maintained. However, within this framework, science, and we have all different technologies and how to leverage them in order to protect lives and people's livelihoods. So that has to be considered. That's a big responsibility of politicians. Starting with the construction, we have different frameworks which have to be protected and will be protected. And we will consider such technologies as well in order to assure people's peace of mind and understanding. So as politicians, we'd like to thoroughly consider and fulfill our accountability, and that way necessary technologies will be also considered as well. But beyond this, about the specifics, I'd like to refrain from commenting on details. However, based on this basic posture, we'd like to handle this matter.
最後、中国新聞樋口さん。
Higuchi-san from Chigoku newspaper, the last question. So in the future, the increase of defense budget is my question. In 5 years, you will secure 43 trillion yen, and this is an unprecedented amount of increase, especially if, as Hiroshima that hopes for peace. This might become an endless arm proliferation and may lead to a war. That's the concern. And you said in next 5 years and beyond, defense capabilities need to be maintained and further strengthened. And Japan has been calling for, and you are from Hiroshima, who's been advocating for a nuke-free world. What's your idea on that? Well, again, I feel the necessity to explain the ideas of the government and the 3 defense documents and our national security policy. Based on that, it means we are going to change. We are going to change our policy, national security policy after post-war era, and we will protect the framework of Japan's legal framework, which is the prerequisite. Deterrence and the responsiveness will be enhanced to lower the possibility of military attack against Japan. That's the basic idea, and it is important to enhance our deterrence and responsiveness. And we need to create an international environment that is favorable for Japan. For that, diplomacy comes to first. But for diplomacy, we also need to underpin that. We need to have a solid structure to be able to protect the lives and the livelihood of the public. That will be the underpinning force for diplomacy, and that will also make our diplomatic activities more convincing. So that's what we have in mind as we think to build up our defense capabilities. Not only towards our public, we will also explain carefully to the international community what do we mean by build up our defense capability, what it entails. We will continue to provide a careful and a thorough explanation. For the concerns that you raised, we would also like to explain carefully. Why do we have to think about defense policy now? Why do we have to reinforce defense capabilities now? We would like to gain understanding through a thorough explanation by the government. With that, we conclude today's press conference. Thank you very much for your cooperation.